I don't know about the rest of you, but I feel like I've lost track of days this week. I've been off for a week, and with Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, and the Bears played on Thursday, it's thrown off my whole calendar. I had to look at the calendar today just to remember that it was Sunday, and I had to come to church. So what's going on today? And why has the church chosen to insert this feast just a couple of days after Christmas? I mean, just a couple of days ago, Jesus was born, and now today he's 12 years old and he's causing trouble in the temple. And even worse, in a couple of more days, we're going to celebrate the Epiphany next Sunday, and he's back to being a baby. So why is the church doing this to us? Why is the church subjecting us to this time warp? Well, let's get into that. He was, after all, just a normal Jewish boy. He was an only child who did the sorts of things that normal Jewish boys do. He played with his friends, he did chores for his parents, he ate the Passover meal with his family, and he worshiped God with his family. I'm speaking, of course, of Gene Simmons from the rock group Kiss. There's a picture of Gene Simmons up on the screen with his mother. Believe it or not, despite his outward appearance that looks like something out of a nightmare, Gene Simmons never drank or did drugs because of his mother. You see, his mother was a Holocaust survivor who endured the horrors of a concentration camp where many of her family perished. "I'm her only son," the musician said. "I knew I had no right to hurt my mother. Life had already done enough to her." I found that interesting as I contemplated today's gospel and thought about Jesus and Mary. I suspect that Jesus had no intention of hurting his mother or causing her any anguish. So what's the point of this story then? Is it just to show bad parenting? Or the sort of angst that goes along with a rebellious preteen? I mean, what's the point of today's story? After all, imagine the psychological torture that Mary must have gone through. Any parent knows if you've misplaced your child for even a moment, it causes fear and panic and anxiety. Well, the official name for today's feast is the Holy Family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. It was instituted by Pope Leo XIII in 1893 as sort of a response to the Industrial Revolution. Pope Leo thought that as people were getting more and more involved in their work lives, that it was destroying the nuclear family. So he situated today's feast right after Christmas to remind all of us that family is important, not just to us, but to Jesus. The feast honors Jesus, the Blessed Mother, and Saint Joseph as the holiest of families, and therefore as a model for all families. They were holy because they placed God at the center of their family life. They loved and sacrificed for one another, and they radiated that love to others in the redemptive mission of Jesus. Pope St. John Paul II said, "The Redeemer of the world chose the family as the place for his birth and growth, thereby sanctifying the family." But I have to be honest with you. This feast bothers me a little. Because the tendency, at least for me, is to compare my family to the Holy Family, and we will seemingly never measure up. For most of us, our lives, our work, our routines are pretty humdrum, pretty ordinary, not seemingly very holy at all. But maybe that's the point. The Gospels are largely silent about Jesus' childhood and adolescence. We don't know much about what he did from the day his parents found him in the temple and his public ministry. Luke says today that Jesus was 12 years old, and then nothing much happens until Jesus is about 30. Perhaps that's to show that Jesus, Mary, and Joseph were a pretty normal and humble family who simply lived their lives together. Our catechism says, during the greater part of his life, Jesus shared the condition of the vast majority of human beings, a daily life spent without evident greatness, a life of manual labor. So with that as a backdrop, when you stop to think about it, the incarnation, Christmas, is really radical, incomprehensible. God took on our human flesh. He condescended to become an obscure nobody for 20 or 30 years in a poor little hillside town in Galilee. He fully entered into and engaged with our humanity. He really and truly became one of us. And he surrendered to the will of God. And that's what made him holy. He took on our ordinariness and sanctified it and turned it into a source of grace, so that every time we make dinner or do the laundry or take out the trash or go to work or gather together on Sunday to worship God, we're doing the very same things that Jesus did. And I think that's the point of today's feast. Jesus, the divine, entered into our humanity so that we could become divine through our years of quiet, unspectacular living. Just so long as we do two things: love God and love our neighbor. Seems pretty simple, doesn't it? So, just remember those letters. K-I-S-S. Keep it simple, sinner.